this meeting to order and welcome Mr. Rowe. He's had a good, vigorous walk, it looks like. He's raring to go. Let me acknowledge that we are meeting on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. Welcome to meeting 43 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format. Let me remind the participants of the following points. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you. For those participating by video conference, we have 2 this afternoon. Click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Let me remind you that committee members may ask questions in either English or French. If you will need interpretation, please take a moment now to prepare your earpiece and select the listening channel you need in advance in order to take full advantage of the time allotted for questions and answers. And also a reminder, not that this happens all the time, but all comments should be addressed through the chair. Colleagues, pursuant to Standing Order 108.2 and the motion adopted on Thursday, April 23, 2026, the committee shall resume its study of Canada's electrification, energy self-sufficiency, and domestic energy security. And let me, on your behalf, welcome our witnesses on the screen. As an individual, Philip Dunsky, former chair, Canada Electricity Advisory Council. And from the Canadian Climate Institute, also by video conference, Kate Harland. From the Transition Accelerator, Mr. Mo Cabrera, Chief Executive Officer, who's with us in person. All virtual witnesses have conducted a mandatory witness onboarding test, and each of you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we'll open the floor to questions and comments. Mr. Dunsky, we're going to start with you. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. Merci beaucoup de me recevoir pour cette audience. I will speak in English, though I'm more than happy to answer any questions dans la langue de Molière également. Look, let me maybe start with a little introduction to myself. I've been advising on energy issues for 35 years now. The firm that I run supports utilities, governments, investors, and others across every province and territory in this country and the majority of U.S. states. I have a team of about 70 experts who work on nothing but energy issues. And over the course of my career, I've had the privilege of sitting on many, maybe far too many, energy policy committees and commissions, including most recently the Canada Electricity Advisory Council that I was invited to chair. So a few remarks on the transition. It's been a while for me. It's been, like I said, 35 years. And in that time, I don't think there's ever been a more exciting and at the same time a more daunting time to be working in electricity in this country. The reason is simple, as I'm sure that you're all very well aware. We are now squarely in the midst of a transition toward electricity. This is a transition that will affect not everything that we consume, but a majority of vehicles, of heating systems, much of industry, and of course the AI revolution that we seem to be in now. It's arguably one of the most wide-ranging, complex, profound, and ultimately daunting energy transitions our world has ever known. What I try to do in my work is ask myself a simple question, and I ask myself that on behalf of my clients as well, and that is, what will things look like on the other side of this transition when we're through it? There will invariably be winners and losers, as there are in any large-scale economic transition. This will be no different. And those who position themselves in advance, those who focus on their competitive advantages, those who are thoughtful without being slow-footed, and those who are proactive in harnessing new technology are the ones who ultimately stand the best chance of winning. Those who drag their feet and wait to see how it all plays out are arguably the ones who will be most likely to lose at the end of the game. So I'm a Canadian. I want Canada to win this race. I think we have everything that we need to win it. A couple of years ago, I was asked to chair the Canada Electricity Advisory Council. It was a one-year initiative, once and done. I like to think that I may have done a bit of the legwork for many of you on this issue. We spent 12 months with a very, I'll say, Canada-sized array of energy sector leaders with very different perspectives, very different, I'll say, biases, because we've all got them, and still managed to achieve consensus across the board on what Canada needs to do to win this. So I'm not going to have time in these 5 minutes to go into individual recommendations, but I will share perhaps the overarching principles and conclusions that we came to, and that is that fundamentally there are two things that we need to do as a country. One is grow, and the other is clean. So we need to grow the power system. We need to grow it more rapidly than we've ever done in our history. That is essential for our economy. It's essential for competitiveness. It's essential for capital attraction. It is, as an aside, unbelievable that so many provinces in this country are now short on electricity and having to turn away business and turn away industry because we don't have the power needed. So we need it for competitiveness. We need it for capital attraction. We need it obviously for reliability. We need to keep the lights on. We need to get to a point of being able to say yes, not no. And we also need to do this clean. That's important for the climate, of course. That is also important for our competitiveness. It's also important for our ability to attract capital. Leaning into one of our great strengths, which is that we have the second cleanest electricity system in the G7, the third cleanest in the G20, at a time when more and more countries are looking to price carbon into markets. This is a tremendous competitive advantage that we cannot lose. So lean into grow, lean into clean. There are obvious trade-offs between those two. We cannot go too far too fast on the clean, lest we slow the growth or harm affordability or reliability. We can't do that.
Thank you, Mr. Dunsky. We're at time there, and we're already running a little bit behind, so thanks for your understanding. And I think you got most of your points in there. So we're going to go on now to Ms. Harland. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation to meet with committee. My name is Kate Harland, and I am the Director of Clean Growth at the Canadian Climate Institute. And I'm going to draw on some work that the research that the Institute has been working on over the past year. So I think I'll make 4 main points. And the first is that low-cost, abundant electricity enables both economic growth and electrification. So access to reliable, low-cost power underpins economic growth. It has been a competitive advantage for Canada in the past, but Canada has to be proactive to retain and leverage that advantage.
Sorry, Ms. Harland, we just had a point of order raised. Is there... Oh, volume. Yeah, that's... Well, if you have your earpiece on, Ms. Harland, the sound has been a little low. And also, I would urge you to perhaps speak a little slower for the sake of our interpreters. Okay. Thank you.
I will, yes. Thank you. Okay.
One moment. Monsieur Simard. Yeah.
It's the sound in the room that's really low because the interpreting is working perfectly.
If we could adjust that. Yep. And it's fine through the earpieces, and thank you for your understanding, Ms. Harland. We stopped your time, so no need to super rush. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So according to work by Mr. Dunsky's firm, the Canadian economy is at risk of missing out of 110 to 220 billion in potential capital investment due to insufficient supply of clean electricity for the current pipeline of projects. Our interviews over the past year have similarly found tightening supply across the country and lengthening queues. And as demand grows and continues to outpace supply, these opportunity costs only climb. Industrial investors will only deploy capital here if they get timely access to power at competitive rates. This applies both to new sectors such as battery production, critical minerals, and data centers, as much as to existing industries looking to electrify and spend billions in expansion. My second point, falling costs of solar and wind and batteries mean that flexible, clean grids can deliver abundant power at lower cost, and that's a big change. We've seen wind, solar, and battery costs fall dramatically over the past decade. Since 2009, solar costs have fallen by 84% and onshore wind by 56%, while battery costs declined 27% in the last year alone. But it's not just these technology shifts in terms of cost. Electricity systems also have room to modernize and help keep rates competitive as they grow by operating more flexibly. Flexible systems on both the demand and supply side can help build out a cost-effective system. With expanded storage, demand flexibility, interties, and smarter grid operations, Canada can use its infrastructure more productively, avoiding both the cost of overbuilding for peak and the waste of low-cost renewable power. Reimagining electricity systems is a major economic opportunity, yet current electricity planning processes and institutions are rooted in a world that no longer exists, with obsolete assumptions of technology costs, assumptions about fixed demand, and limited focus on flexibility. So third, Canadian electricity systems aren't keeping up with international competitors in creating the conditions to seize the economic opportunity. Our forthcoming analysis compares 4 Canadian provinces, so that's Ontario, Alberta, Quebec, and BC, against 6 global leaders on what it takes to attract both clean power supply and the industrial investment that demands it. Provinces have different advantages and challenges in this race when it comes to electricity system growth and attracting investment, but all have some actions to take to help build the systems of tomorrow. These involve building a modern grid that can meet growing demand, delivering flexibility, and linking regional power markets. It involves strengthening electricity markets through predictable procurement and modernized industrial rates. And it involves establishing policy certainty to support investment. Jurisdictions doing this, such as Texas, showcase the opportunity from getting this right. Investment in Texas for solar, wind, and storage reached over $27 billion US dollars in 2025 alone. And that's from building, sending clear price signals, fast connections, and building transmission early to help that. Fourth, the federal government has a critical role to play in working with provinces to deliver national benefits. Our research points to 4 areas for federal action. The federal government should support new cooperative processes for interprovincial energy planning, focused on information sharing and goal setting in the short term, and new intergovernmental institutions in the longer term. The federal government should selectively deploy the national balance sheet to support anticipatory grid build-out for nationwide benefit. Specific solutions include both scaling up existing successful financing solutions, such as the Canada Infrastructure Bank, but also direct federal funding. A national test could support more consistent, prioritized application of federal support, recognizing the range of national economic and security benefits. To build long-term policy certainty for clean electricity investors, the federal government should move forward with flexible clean electricity regulations that anchor expectations that new supply will be predominantly clean. And finally, the federal government should prioritize clean flexibility within existing electricity infrastructure and innovation programs, and consider how tax tools like capital cost allowances can mobilize investment in on-site solutions to enable users to shift their demand away from peak periods and offer industry greater agency over its costs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harland. And we will go now to Mr. Kavara. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Transition is disrupting the global economy and global power. So today I want to talk about energy security and how that definition is changing in real time around the world. So for most of modern history, energy security really meant one thing: securing the supply of fuel. The disruption that we're seeing right now in the Strait of Hormuz has put roughly 1/5 of global oil supply at risk, and Canadians have felt it here at the pump. So despite producing over 5 million barrels of oil a day, that is the security problem in its purest form, which is oil is eventually or essentially priced on global markets. So conflict on the other side of the world sets the price here at home no matter how much we produce. But one thing to watch is how other countries are responding to this moment and how they've been responding over the last few years. So Pakistan, for example, last year imported 17 gigawatts of solar panels in a single year. And when the Strait of Hormuz crisis hit, solar exports from China doubled in 1 month. Ethiopia, which is, most countries aren't thinking about Ethiopia as a country that has 6 out of 10 electric vehicles sold or new registration last year, right? And it's not because they're trying to do this for climate policy or environmental policy. They're saving $4 billion a year in foreign currency by avoiding imports of fuels. So these, I would argue, are not environmental decisions made by these countries that are growing economically. These are energy security decisions. And around the world, electricity is becoming how countries are buying security because it is produced, delivered, and priced domestically. So in Canada, the sectors that drive our energy demand, how we move, how we heat our homes, buildings, run our industries, manufacturing, data centers, et cetera, are going to increasingly shift towards electricity. And as they do, the security in those sectors stops being a question of fuel supply and becomes a question of whether we have the electricity to provide reliably and affordably. And so I'm here really to make the point that the frontier of our energy security is moving from fuels to electricity systems. And listen, I'm a pragmatist, I'm a realist. We cannot electrify everything overnight. This is a multi-decade undertaking, and energy demand still has to be met every year while it happens. So oil and gas remain essential through the transition itself. But again, I'm here to make the point of watching where the puck is actually going, right? So electrification can only proceed if electricity stays affordable and reliable. So for example, a perfectly clean grid is not necessarily the objective if we compromise whether we can build it large enough, whether it's reliable enough, whether it's affordable enough to actually enable the electrification of the economy. So the point really I want to emphasize is that to get there, we need the discipline, because Canada is going to commit to new long-lived energy infrastructure to secure our energy, conventional and electric. And the decisive questions are concrete one. What volumes are we talking about? What markets are we serving? What demand? Over what time frame? So does the asset that we're building still earn its place? And this discipline matters especially when public funds are put on the table to help de-risk private investments, because that is precisely when the downside, when the analysis is incorrect, it falls on the taxpayers. So that really brings me to the opportunity and the risk of this as well. So the supply chains that underpin electrification are going to be a central risk of this, because we're still going to be importing switchgear, transformers, batteries from a small number of concentrated global suppliers if we don't actually build these things at home. And for me, that is a risk. It's different than buying a fuel that you have to burn every year, but it's still a risk when you're importing these equipment. So that same build-out is going to create an opportunity for Canada, an industrial opportunity, to really create the supply chain here at home to help us supply this growth that we're talking about on our grid, but also supply our allies and diversify our trade. So essentially, with the last 30 seconds I have here, what is the federal role in enabling this energy security through electrification? Well, we know that we're going to have to spend a lot to build this grid, to modernize the grid. We're currently spending about 0.7% of our GDP. We need to be spending 1.7, so an additional 1% of GDP, about $30 billion a year, right? So obviously the federal government is not going to pay for all of that. It's a lot of it provincial jurisdiction, but what can the federal government do? Sustaining a long, durable, long-term horizon signal and leveraging our AAA credit rating to lower the cost of capital, increasing support so that these benefits show up on the Canadian bills and not just on paper or in theory. So thank you so much for having me today.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kabara. Thank you to all of our witnesses. We'll move on to questions and comments from colleagues, and we're going to start with you, Mrs. Stubbs, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, for that introduction, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Just given that it's my first opportunity and we are nearing the end of the parliamentary session, given the emphasis that all of the witnesses have made on the necessity for certainty and clarity and major projects to be built in Canada for national security, for affordability, and for geopolitical security, I would like to move the following motion that I put on notice Friday, May 26, 2026, That motion is that the committee make the following report to the House. Quote, your committee wishes to report the following observations. Canada is in a privileged position to establish itself as a global energy leader. Demand for oil in the Asian market is expected to dramatically increase in the coming decades, and see increasing production of Alberta oil and gas to reach Canada's export goals has the potential to create hundreds of thousands of new jobs and contribute significantly to Canada's economic growth, sovereignty, and national security. Therefore, your committee is of the view that an Alberta oil pipeline to the West Coast is in the national interest. And the reason that I bring this motion today and that we hope that this committee will support making this report to the House of Commons is, of course, because the Prime Minister did get elected on a promise to Canadians to pursue the construction of a pipeline to the Pacific so that Canada's most valuable export in oil and gas, which of course is also heavily invested because most energy companies are all kinds of energy companies in renewable and alternative energy and technology development long into the future, and Conservatives certainly believe that all and every kind of energy is what must be developed in Canada and exported around the world. But of course, it is undeniable that the entire Canadian economy is underpinned by the outsized contribution of the Canadian oil and gas sector. So the reason that it's important for this committee to consider this motion today is, of course, in part related to some comments that have been made by the heads of the major pipeline companies and by a producer proponent that also are all looking for the Liberals to keep their promises for legislative and regulatory reform that would actually allow private sector producing proponents and then private sector pipeline proponents to invest in these projects, to create jobs for Canada, to pay the revenue and royalties and in taxes to all three levels of government that provide the programs and services that every and all Canadians care about right across the country. So, of course, it is not news at all that the majority of Canadians do support the construction of more oil and gas production and exports from Canada. That has been the case for years, but for committee members and anyone watching, perhaps it is important for us to reflect on the latest public opinion polling about how much it is that Canadians want the Liberals to keep their promise on constructing a pipeline to the Pacific. Just as recently as January, of course, support for that pipeline construction is up right across the country, everywhere, you know, with 55% support in British Columbia, with 66% support of Ontarians, 64% of people in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, 51% of Quebecers, just as they always also said during the debates on the West to East pipeline, support the construction of a Pacific pipeline. And 62% of Atlantic Canadians, of course, support the construction of this pipeline to the Pacific. And no surprise at all, of course, in what would be the strongest gesture from the Liberal government towards economic, fiscal, and national unity would be the keeping of their promise to construct a pipeline to the Pacific with of course, 81% of Albertans supporting that promise that the Liberals made. So the issue that I think we must be seized with, though, colleagues, is to join in the pressure to call aggressively for the full-scale legislative and regulatory reform that this country needs in order for our businesses to be able to compete primarily with the United States, who, of course, as we know, have aggressively shortened their permitting timelines. And we've heard just recently are intending to pursue even faster, streamlined approvals for major projects, particularly with regard to oil and gas, nuclear, critical minerals. And, of course, their emergency permitting procedures on federal land can happen even all the way down to a month. And now I'm not suggesting that that would be necessarily possible in Canada, since the federal government must keep its Section 35 duty to consult and accommodate. But to know that the United States of America has already set their approval timelines at 2 years, that happened under Biden, and that the current president is aggressively shortening those permitting timelines, to know that our own Prime Minister said it correctly, that Canada is facing a crisis, And the Americans have brought in that very fast approval timelines for critical projects on national lands, on federal lands. They too are striving to get their permitting timelines overall down to a year. And the reason that we should be very seized by this issue right now is, of course, there are only a couple of pipeline proponents in Canada who would be capable of constructing such infrastructure. And one of them, of course, is this company called Enbridge, which in the time that I have been elected actually proposed a standalone export pipeline to Asian markets to the Pacific, which would be fully operational today, and Canada, of course, would have multiple customers beyond the United States of America. The court did rule, as it has with many governments, including on the Liberals' initial Indigenous consultation on the Trans Mountain expansion, that that was insufficient in the case of the Northern Gateway Pipeline. And of course, the choice put by the court to the Prime Minister of the time was that he could redo that Indigenous consultation to make that sufficient, or he could do what he did, which was without consultation of any of the Indigenous communities that all supported the Northern Gateway Pipeline and were counting on those future opportunities for their communities. He vetoed it outright since I've been elected. So that's gone. And of course, Atlantic Canadians know well that there was another company, TC Energy, who also within the time that I've been elected, the last 11 years, this exact same Liberal government, was proposing cross-country pipeline infrastructure to bring energy resources from the west to refineries in the east and also to export to Europe. And what happened was eerily similar to what is going on right now, which is that the Liberals froze the regulatory process for all major energy projects, announced a series of values and principles that almost no Canadian would disagree with and were hallmarks of the Canadian regulatory system. It's very close to what's happening now, doesn't it? And then the Liberals started adjudicating on major infrastructure and energy projects case by case by case. And when it came to the West East Pipeline, of course, they had to set up one panel that then got disbanded, do another one, and they put conditions on it that no other pipeline has ever been asked to meet ever since. The company, TransCanada, that now has dropped Canada from its name and primarily focuses on the United States, warned that they were going to have to abandon the project, and then they did. And that, of course, was a domestic partisan political decision. So we should listen very carefully to what the CEO of Enbridge has said, and he has said that this new pipeline to the Pacific, being the head of the company that tried to build one in the last 11 years, says, quote, not the type of risk that we're looking to take on at this time. And I don't think investors or the infrastructure companies should be taking on all that risk of the development in jurisdictions that have historically created a challenge. And then he says, what I would say is that the conditions don't yet exist for that pipeline to get built. Now, everybody should be aware, like what was lost to Canada when the Northern Gateway Pipeline was vetoed by this exact same Liberal government was 5,500 person years of on-site employment, 57,200 person years of employment through the Canadian economy, $85 million per year in tax revenue, labor income from construction of approximately $2.5 billion in BC, $1.2 billion in Alberta, and $4.3 billion, the most, for all of Canada. Overall, Canada's GDP would have increased by $300 billion over 30 years. So that is the opportunities that this same Liberal government killed when they vetoed Northern Gateway Pipeline. So we must, I think, take very seriously the comments of the CEO of that same company saying today that the conditions do not exist. And that, of course, is backed up by previous and recent comments. The CEO of TC, the company that also tried to build a cross-country west to east pipeline, he says, for too long, capital has not felt welcome in Canada. He says the U.S. will continue to be where we'll invest. He says industry in the U.S. believes it takes too long to approve projects, but reforms and policy alignment south of the border have accelerated federal approvals, reduced regulatory timelines, and prioritized domestic energy and infrastructure development. And they are in the mode of continuous improvement. So then the TC Energy CEO says, uncertainty is the enemy of investment, and this global competition is fierce. We allocate capital across projects in Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, and our investors expected to earn the strongest risk-adjusted returns over the past few years. That's increasingly meant, the United States.
Apologies, the bells are ringing, so I have to alert to the committee to that fact. Sorry, Shannon, you were going there. So colleagues, we have to suspend.
You can ask.
Oh, no, I need unanimous consent to go into our, to go into the bells period. Colleagues, I'm in your hands.
I will pretty soon.
I
am about.
think I see the committee would like to proceed. Monsieur Simak? Yeah? Look at, he's so relaxed. Yeah.
Particulier à ce qui se dit présentement.
I'm not here.
It's funny what's being said now.
Thank
Ms. Stubbs, I don't see any.
Do you want me to give you a hard cutoff? For...
Yeah, so why don't we go till about 15 minutes before? Is that all right?
Thank you.
Okay.
That should be sufficient. Thank you so much. And thank you, colleagues, for allowing this, allowing me to continue comments so that I can really make the case to you why I hope you will support our motion to report this to the House of Commons. So I just also want to mention then the most recent comments by a CEO who is Canadian, and he is the head of Canada's biggest oil producer, Cenovus. You know, he has made the point just recently, and really it should seize all Canadians, when he says investment has left Canada for other jurisdictions. The jobs that come with investment, together with the taxes and royalties, were never realized. Foreign investors and producers have left and taken with them the benefits they bring. But through this, the world has not demanded one less barrel of oil, not one less MCF of natural gas. The world just gets it. As conservatives have been saying for 11 years and before that, the world just gets it from different jurisdictions like the US, Russia, and the Middle East. He says what is missing is the commitment to regulatory reform that would allow industry to grow production to offset the costs of the Pathways project and to fill the 1 million barrel per day promised Pacific pipeline. He makes the point that the carbon tax then will escalate through time, which makes industry less resilient, and he says will limit production. He says without a competitive investment regime coordinated, then the investment required to make this reality will be challenged. What I want all Canadians and committee members to really recognize here is that none of these pipeline companies and none of these producers are asking for subsidies. What they are asking for is legislative and regulatory reform that is competitive, attractive, certain, and fair. And every kind of energy developer of all kinds, because all investors in every sector need that sort of reality. And the government should really take note when, in a very unusual move, Canadian CEOs have spoken quite aggressively about what has to be done. This is normal in the United States. It's quite abnormal for Canadian CEOs to speak out in the way that they have. And so just to make clear to Canadians as to why this is not preemptive and as to why every member of this committee should support this motion is because as far back as March 9th, and March 19th, 2025, CEOs of Canadian companies all across Canada's resource sector, 14 of them, sent a letter. Well, in April 2025, then 38 followed up. And in September 15th, 2025, 97 CEOs of all kinds of energy companies of all kinds of sizes right across the sector sent a letter. And what are the main things that they call for? Well, they are asking for exactly that legislative and regulatory reform that the Liberals say is coming. But the Liberals, of course, also promised 2-year timelines for approvals. They rejected when I tried to put it in the law. And we're advancing into the 2 years of the Prime Minister being in power, and he hasn't yet to bring forward the legislative and regulatory reform agenda that is clearly being called for by provincial leaders, territorial leaders, industrial representatives, economists, proponents of all kind. They want significant simplification of regulations that includes the repeal or the reform of C-69 and of C-48. They want the shortened timelines for project approvals. They want a commitment to grow production. They want a fiscal framework that attracts investment. And of course, like all of us, they want expanded incentive for Indigenous investment opportunities. So these, colleagues, are all of the reasons that I think all of us here as members of Parliament and for Canadians everywhere should be seized by this motion. I really do hope that you'll consider supporting it. And certainly on behalf of all Canadians, I would say we agree that Canada is in a crisis, that this has been a crisis, though, that was preventable. And then the reason that Canada is in a vulnerable and isolated position playing catch up now is because of the anti-development laws and policies that have been inflicted domestically. And that's why I hope that every member of this committee will support this motion. And we will all work in partnership, as we have committed with the federal government, to ensure the construction of that pipeline to the Pacific can get built, because Conservatives support the construction of pipelines in all directions for Canada, for the benefit of all Canadians, without carbon taxes and without billions in corporate welfare that isn't needed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Stubbs. That motion is in order, colleagues. It was put on notice May 29th. And I have a short speakers list, Mr. Hogan, Mr. Rowe, Mr. Kibble. So, Mr. Hogan, we're going to go to you first.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I appreciate the intent of my colleague's motion. I agree with the observations both in the motion and many, but obviously not all of her commentary that she provided. On improving regulatory speed, I pointed to our recent discussion paper on this topic. The pipeline projects she refers to in her motion, Northern Gateway, Energy East, KXL, Trans Mountain, are all projects I've worked on, so I am mindful and appreciative of many of her commentary there. It's my firm belief if you're going to move oil and gas, pipelines are the cheapest, safest, most environmentally friendly way to do so. It is also my firm belief that we should do what we can do to reduce reliance on the United States, the current destination for 90% of Canada's oil exports. Declaring a pipeline that is consistent with the Building Canada Act and the national interest is already the intention of the federal government, as was committed to in the implementation agreement for the Alberta-Canada MOU. So the opposition is pushing on a bit of an open door there, twisting a rubber arm, but we also have witnesses here, and energy security is a very important topic, and we're also getting a bit of ahead of ourselves as Alberta hasn't submitted a proposal. They're going to by July 1st, and we are on the timeline agreed to with the Alberta government, and I think sticking to a timeline, sticking to a plan agreed to with Alberta is how we bring the stability that Ms. Stubbs mentioned, and I think that's important. There's also negotiations ongoing involving Alberta, Canada, and other parties that we do not want to unbalance, and we also need to acknowledge that opinions we've heard presented publicly are presented in that context, and it is the choice of those parties to do so, but the Government of Canada does not want to negotiate in public. So let's find time for this later. We would love to revisit this motion once a proposal is submitted and we can properly schedule a discussion. For today, I move to adjourn debate on the motion.
Colleagues, you've heard the motion. It's non-debatable, a dilatory motion. And Mr. Clerk will go to the vote. Yes.
Mr. Hogan? Mr. Danko?
Yay.
Mr. Gay?
Yay. Oui.
Ms. McKelvey?
Yay.
Mr. Saini?
Yes.
Monsieur Saint-Pierre?
Oui.
Ms. Stubbs?
Nay.
Mr. Rowe?
Nay.
Mr. Kibble?
Nay.
Monsieur Mallette?
No.
Monsieur Simard?
Oui.
Okay. You announce?
No, you and
I announce. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Nays, yeas 7, nays 9. Oh, sorry. Yeas 4. Your 4 looks like a 9.
Oh my gosh, it was like going to be like the first time in my life.
Sorry. Yeas 7, nays 4. The motion is carried. Debate is adjourned on that item. Colleagues, I think this is probably a good time to break. I'm going to be thinking about. Yes, we'll Mr. Cabrera, if you could stick around, Ms. Harland, Mr. Dunsky, we're going to see what we can do in terms of just adjusting.
On peut vous offrir un verre de vin ou
but we'll be back at you
So we have 15,
about 25 minutes?
20 to 30.
Yeah, about 25 minutes. So we are suspended for 25 minutes.
Oh no, Black's going to have so bad.
So
We've spoken to vice chairs or their representatives, and it's been agreed that we are going to truncate our rounds of questions a little bit. We're going to go. We're going to do partway through the second round. We have to drop off the fourth and fifth speakers. So sorry, Mr. Rose. Sorry, Mr. Danko. Ms. Stubbs, Mrs. Stubbs, you still have 5.5 minutes. You don't have to use them all.
I think that I'm going to share that time with my colleague Jonathan Rowe.
Okay, well that's exactly what I meant.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you
Chair.
very much, Mr. Chair. My first question is today for Mr. Cabrera. You know, we're looking at going to green energy, and I know for me, there's a big uptake in solar panels, and it's very intriguing to be able to put a solar panel on your roof and offset your electricity costs. And many of Canadians would like to do that. But where are all of our solar panels coming from right now? Are we doing much solar panel manufacturing in Canada, or is it coming from other countries like China and other places?
Yeah, most of the solar panel supply is currently from global suppliers, which is, as I mentioned, that's a risk long term, which is why we need to build the Canadian supply chain, which is also an industrial opportunity.
Yeah, I just had a little trouble hearing you, but I got the gist of it. Yeah, I think what's interesting is that what we've seen with the Chinese, with the Huawei, I think it was the name of it, for the cell phone companies, where we had big spy issues after. The corporations actually are being instructed by the federal government to actually remove some technologies throughout Canada because of the interference from the Chinese government. And I'm curious, you know, if we rely on Chinese solar panels across Canada, maybe not a solar panel on my roof, you know, that small, but if we start putting in these big solar farms across Canada and it's with Chinese technology, you know, is there a security risk with that they can actually make a phone call or flick a switch and turn that off?
I mean, I presented to a different committee on the EV question, the Chinese EV questions. I mean, I think cybersecurity is a concern that we need to be taken seriously in all cases. I think it's not really as simple as, you know, you plug an EV in the grid and it's going to blow up, or they're going to control our grid. It's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, and I appreciate you're taking it seriously, because I heard some giggles across the way, which I thought was very funny, considering, you know, how serious it would be if our solar farms did shut down, and especially in the middle of winter when we have cold temperatures and lots of frost and a lot of sun wintertime as well. So we would be dependent on those solar panels, and then all of a sudden people at home are freezing because the Chinese may have a backdoor entry into those solar farms. So, you know, that's a big concern, and it's not, and I don't think it's a conspiracy theory or out from left field, because we've seen this with our cell phone industry. So I guess the question is, how do we in Canada build these solar panels here, and how do we get that technology built in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally focusing on building elements of the supply chain where it is going to be, you know, possible for Canada to compete, but also relying on allies and partners across the world to secure the supply, to have a more secure supply chain long term.
So which ones can we partner with right now that have a good supply of solar panels that we can do that with?
I mean, I think that generally looking at, you know, the some of the European countries like Germany and others have you know, a strong solar industry relatively. I mean, I think it is true that the Chinese dominate the solar sector, and again, I think they do that because they realize where the puck was going. I think again, the security concerns can be addressed. They're not fatalistic. But I think there's another opportunity here for us to compete industrially, which is why we need to be able to build our own supply chain and collaborate with other partners across the globe from Asian, European countries that are more reliable partners for us.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think we need to give our Canadian corporations every competitive edge we can. And, you know, right now we're seeing that the Chinese actually put tariffs on Newfoundland and Labrador seafood, and that's very frustrating. Do you think we could do counter tariffs on the Chinese? Would it be a good idea to put counter tariffs on the Chinese for the solar panels and stuff to give our Canadian corporations a fighting chance in the industry?
I don't really have any particular views on the tariff response, you know, vis-a-vis the seafood tariff. But I do feel like tariffs generally need to be used in order to help build our industry, but they're not a long-term strategy, in terms of being able to insulate yourself forever. So I do think there is a role for tariffs in the near and the medium term to help secure and build an industry, but long-term strategies need to be considered that go beyond tariffs.
So with the automotive industry, with the spy cars coming in and having EVs in Canada, do you think that helped our automotive industry because we lifted those and let those cars come in?
Yeah, I mean, our position on that has been that right now, if you look at China's exports of just general automotive, they went from a million vehicles in 2020 to 7 million last year. So that's 7x increase in 5 years. I think the North American fortress approach is not going to work long term. I think if you think you're going to be able to stop the technology from coming in long term, I wish people the best of luck. I wish the industry the best of luck. The question is, do we do it on our own terms? Do we have some kind of security as we do it? And I think the approach of using what I would call selective exposure, so you allow a small number of vehicles in that can still insulate your vehicle market, and also making sure, as you mentioned, the cybersecurity concerns, we can have Canadian software deals running on the hardware so we have more control. I don't think those concerns are unwarranted, but I do think there are solutions for them that go beyond, like I said, trying to build a fortress and say we're going to stay behind this fortress forever, given just how the expansion has happened.
Thank you both.
Excuse me, sir.
Mr. Gay, you have 6 minutes or less.
Or less. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. It's great to see you. Mr. Dunsky, I'll ask you the first question. The Canadian Council that you chaired said that the progress can be stopped by overlapping policies or that conflict with different levels of government, public services, and regulatory services. In your opinion, is the one project, one evaluation approach put in place by the federal government and multiple provinces, will that fix a part of that problem? And if you could help us, what could we do more?
Pour la question, oui.
Thank you for the question. Yes, it's clear that a one project, one review approach is key if you want to be able to build a lot quicker. So absolutely, I salute those initiatives. There's a lot more that we're going to have to do on that topic. Currently, there's too much overlap, too much duplication. There's still rules for review that are inefficient or unnecessary. Sometimes, not always. Sometimes it's too much. So it can take 2 or 3 years to review one part of a project when it could be done in a shorter period of time. There's a long list. It's a whole project to review rules and procedures. And the federal government is only responsible for a part of that process. Provinces each have their own rules and procedures. And that can also lead to delays and difficulties.
Stopped your time. Colleagues, just brought to my attention, Mr. Cabrera has to leave about 25 after, so just to make you aware of that in case you want to ask any questions of him before he has to leave and catch a train back to Montreal.
Monsieur Dunsky, la nouvelle stratégie nationale.
The new electrification strategy, which covers a lot of the recommendations that you submitted, recognized that electric networks in Canada are fragmented and that we need the best connections east in all directions to reduce overlapping infrastructure. In your opinion, how can the federal government support interties? We know that planning is often provincial, but we need to build a national, network. It's a major issue. If I had to choose one priority, that would be it. It's to facilitate more exchanges between provinces for electricity. But it's very difficult because there are silos in Canada. Each province is working in a silo. It's in the Constitution. We're not going to dispute that. However, the federal government can play a role as a facilitator and facilitate discussions between provinces. Provinces, with some exceptions, aren't used to planning together. So most of the time, we can manage to put forward one project or two, but we're losing out on a lot of opportunities here because each province is doing things separately without speaking to each other and without integrating those projects. And when it's done that way, then you're leaving money on the table. You're losing out on a lot of money because we cannot optimize the network. So the federal government cannot control everything, but they can facilitate it. They can create a framework. The federal government could create a framework for an interprovincial review of costs and benefits, as well as a funding framework, interprovincial funding framework. As well, the federal government can use its checkbook to contribute to projects, interprovincial projects, and ensure that a province that is less advantaged by a certain project be compensated. That's European approach with their own framework for projects between European countries. And that's the approach that the Council put forward.
Mr. Cabrera, I know you produced a report. How should the federal government design affordability measures so that households most at risk are not left behind?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think basically, as I mentioned, when we're talking about electricity rates, ratepayer versus taxpayer, there are ways for the government to use its AAA credit rating to reduce the cost of capital for building this grid. The Prime Minister mentioned that, so we need to basically activate the level of ambition fiscally that can meet the level of ambition in the strategy of doubling the grid.
Okay. Thank you both. Monsieur Simard, 6 minutes. Allez-y.
Merci beaucoup, Terry.
Thank you very much, Terry. Mr. Dunsky, I really liked your opening remarks. And it brought something to mind. Maybe we haven't talked about that in the committee. You started off by saying there will be winners and losers, like in every transition with electrification. And maybe the goal is not to be a loser. When you said that, it made me think about a political situation that seems to be a zero-sum game. And we saw that earlier when my conservative colleagues said that as the structure of electrification, if we're thinking about storage or solar panels that are coming from China, well, then we're disqualifying electrification, which is also a model that rivals that of fossil fuels. But let me assure you, I don't think that we're being spied on via solar panels. I maybe think that Alberta is spying on us at the gas pump, but this is why I'm telling you that. Perhaps politically, we should not play a zero-sum game, but a different type of game maybe the two types of energy can coexist. More EVs. It's not in adding more EVs that different energy sources will lose out. I think it's a political problem, a significant problem in Quebec, or rather in Canada. The same thing happened in the beginning of this week when another witness came and had questionable things to say about electrification, and this relationship with China just keeps coming up. So please speak to that. Specifically, when you talked about winners and losers, but perhaps on the importance of electrification. Thank you. I won't get into politics, that's for sure. But it's clear that the world is going electric. If Canada wants to or not, the world is going electric. Practically, that means more and more heating is electric because the technology has improved. Electrification is no longer... Electrification is happening because technology has gotten there. Electricity use is better for a lot of different uses. That said, our choices here in Canada are simple. We can try to slow down certain things, and I don't think that that'll be a winning situation for us. We can go at it head on and try to develop our response with our resources, with our comparative advantages. In that regard, I think Ontario was a prime example. Ontario said, well, if we're going electric, well, we want to do it in our own way. And Ontario is mainly nuclear because they have that expertise. So that approach, saying we're going to do it our way, well, that's good because the alternative is, well, there are two alternatives. First, refuse the technology, the more efficient technology that's more affordable for everyone. No one wins. Or we wait and we simply will not have enough electricity. And then we'll have to say no a lot more than saying yes.
And I think you'll be leaving soon, so... Oh, I see. I thought you wanted to make a comment.
Merci. Si jamais Monsieur Cabara veut répondre.
Thank you, Mr. Kabara. If you have anything to say, please send it in writing. Thank you, Mr. Kabara. To continue, so the major challenge is what Norman Rousseau said. It's to create a value chain in Quebec in the electric sector. There will probably be a part of our report on that. What can the Canadian government do in the midterm to create that value chain for electrification? First, Quebec is probably one of the most advanced in that value chain because Quebec developed its electric network more than other provinces. That said, there's still a lot to be done. My firm is working on the issue of the value chain. We are identifying components that are realistic for Canada, what role Canada could play. We're not going to do everything, but we do have certain advantages that we can use. For instance, transformers. It's not a really hot political topic, but transformers are a great example because they're produced in Canada, but not enough for our uses. We import a lot of transformers, and there's a choke point there that slows down, that really slows down what we need to do. That's just one example, but we must be strategic on that point. If we map it out, well, there's over 1,000 points in the chain, and we need to deliberately choose which parts that Canada has an advantage on, and then hit the gas. And there are a lot of tools that we can have at the federal level, especially at the federal level. One of the major challenges we have is this. The United States has a production tax credit, and our fiscal credit, well, it would be difficult to create a similar credit, and we need to get creative with our solutions.
Merci.
Thank you.
Monsieur Mallette, 5 minutes.
Mr. Millett, 5 minutes.
Monsieur Kibble. So I will be asking the first question, Monsieur Dunsky. On a parlé du nucléaire, l'Ontario.
You talked about nuclear energy in Ontario. They're going forward in their own way. You said something interesting. Those who try and slow down the inevitable. Please speak to that. The inevitable is electrification. The inevitable is electrification. For instance, take a car. Electricity for bringing a car from point A to point B. It takes 3 times less energy than a gas-powered car. It's a performance level that is now higher, and very soon it'll be cheaper as well. In a few years, it'll be an equal amount, and the operating costs will be much less. So if we try and slow it down with EVs, well, we're shooting ourselves in the foot for affordability, for the consumer, for those who own cars. That's just one example. I could name other examples. For a heat pump, we're using 3 times less energy than when we use a gas pump or when we heat with gas. I'm not saying get rid of the gas heaters all at once, but that means that when technology gets to a point where its performance is better than previous technology, well, we ought to accept that technology and move forward quickly in 30 seconds. Will electrification be able to follow the fast progress, make fast progress, rather, in transmission lines, etc.? That's the issue. That's my worry, is that we're not building them fast enough in order to have enough electricity, in order to permit new industries, industrial expansion, and so on. We're in a race. We can't really slow down the demand. We have to hit the gas.
Just like Rosa, questions about the risk of cyber sabotage at industrial facilities. I think it's incredibly important, despite the snickering that we heard from the members opposite. Drawing on my background as someone who ran the Joint Operations Center on the Pacific Coast doing security and surveillance there, I can assure this committee that those are real risks and demand to be taken seriously. My first question is for Ms. Harland. In 2017, this committee recommended that the government implement interprovincial or east-west coast electrical grid connections and corridor. Has this happened? Do you think this is still a valid recommendation? And did you see it as something that contributes to the national security and self-reliance of Canada?
Yes, so to start with, has this happened? I think there is more opportunity now than there was in 2017 for that east-west development of interties. What we saw over the between now 2017 and now is that some of the issues about incentives.
I'm just going to jump in just to clarify. You said there's more opportunity, but regardless of the opportunity, has it actually happened other than a few minor projects? Is this something that's going forward, and does it support national security and self-reliance that is so important? And I think all members of this committee would agree to that. So has it happened, and does it contribute to? Thank you.
So far, major developments haven't happened, and I think that's in part because some of the incentives that balance those winners and losers, those mixed incentives across borders need to be fixed, and that involves coordination,
And
it involves cooperation.
So if you could just then quickly, in the few seconds I have, address the importance of these types of connections with regard to national security and Canada's self-reliance. Thank you.
Yeah. With regards to self-reliance, they're incredibly valuable. We have, for a long time, had most connections north-south with the US. By increasing our connections east-west, we give our own grids more resilience, more flexibility, and operate more interconnection between them. And that strengthens our reliability and our flexibility to operate those within a Canadian context.
Thank you
Perfect.
both.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
That is your time. Mr. St. Pierre, 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'll ask two quick questions to Mr. Dunsky, and then I'll pass my time to MP Danko. Mr. Dunsky, in 2024, you were chairing the Canada Electricity Advisory Council and advising Minister Wilkinson at the time. First, can you submit the Advisory Council's final report to this committee? And secondly, with regards to our government's commitment to doubling the electricity grid by 2050, what would you say are, one, our government's biggest opportunities with regards to doubling the grid, and what are the biggest challenges with regards to doubling the grid?
So thank you. So to your first question, certainly I'm glad to send that over in PDF. I have it here, not to use props, but if I were there, I'd be glad to give it to you in person. In terms of the second question, biggest opportunity and did I understand that correctly? Biggest opportunity and biggest challenge?
Correct.
So, look, the biggest opportunity that we have to grow the grid, I can't give you a single one. That's my challenge. All right, I'm going to give you three real quickly. One is interprovincial transmission. We need that to be able to that doesn't create more power, but that gets us access to the cheapest power in the best place, getting to consumer centers that need it. Number two is building out, especially I'll say renewable power in the short time frame that we have. The fastest and cheapest power out there right now is the clean stuff, the wind and solar and batteries in particular. So moving on to that, and then the third final one I'll say is getting at waste, because we don't have electricity to spare. We are short as a nation now, and we continue to waste. And so getting at that waste, saving more energy through improved energy efficiency, improved productivity is rarely understood for the kind of hard benefit that it is, but it's extremely important.
Yeah, and can I pick up on that? So often what gets most attention is adding capacity to the grid, renewables, solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, et cetera. But what gets less attention is the energy that we don't use, or energy efficiency as a first fuel. Can you quickly, in about 30 seconds before I pass my time to my colleague, talk about why our government should be prioritizing energy efficiency as part of our electricity strategy?
It's the cheapest power available, right? It's really reasonably easy to free up wasted power, and freeing up wasted power is the exact same thing as producing more power, but it can be done immediately. I'll give you one example. One of my clients, Hydro-Quebec, has a plan to free up 3,500 megawatts of power just from energy efficiency. 3,500 megawatts. That's more than the biggest dam that we're talking about, or the biggest power project that we're talking about anywhere in the country.
Thank you, Mr. Dunsky. I'll pass my time to MP Danko.
Thank you. Really appreciate this discussion. I think we've heard from a number of witnesses that the entire world is going to an electric future. So it's good to reinforce that here today. Ms. Harland, a question for you is that, as we're talking about this transition, seeing opportunities with vehicles, with heating, with industry and AI, and you mentioned in your opening statement the risks if we are not a leader, if we're not at the forefront, if we don't take the initiative now. So similar to my colleague's question, what are the risks if we don't build out our electric system the way that you're advocating for? And what are the real solid, tangible opportunities that you see?
Yeah. So that there's a risk that we don't give businesses and industry timely access to power. The queues are getting longer for connecting to the grid. And so that it puts off investors looking, particularly multinationals, trying to decide where to locate their projects. So that's certainly one risk that we see. There's also multinationals who have corporate targets globally to reduce their emissions, and they're looking to electrify, invest as well. And they also will be turned away if they don't see clean power as well available to them for use. So that these pieces were coming through. We interviewed a lot of people over the last year, trying to find out. And we saw across the country there are growing shortages or expectation of shortages across in grids throughout Canada. So those risks are definitely real. Yeah.
Yes, thank you both. That's time. Finalement, Monsieur Simard,
Mr. Simard, 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Mr. Dunsky, I'd like to get back to what you said earlier. You talked about the American advantages or the fiscal advantages that were better for electrification. In the budget, in the last budget for the gas sector, there's the amortization that applies if there's infrastructure. In your opinion, if we applied that to electric infrastructure, like electric storage, would that be a good way to stimulate investment? Yes, generally. Amortization has already been done with multiple different technologies, including renewable technology, if I remember correctly. So, by your expression, I see that that's not the case. Perhaps I am mistaken. But there's a whole host of advantages in doing so. Fast-tracked amortization is good for various projects. It's different if we're talking about value chains or the manufacturing process. I see. This is why I'm telling you that. A witness came before this committee that had a storage strategy with AI to manage peak power demand. And so and they do that, and they can optimize the peak power demand. Is that more efficient? That's a very relevant strategy for energy efficiency. And in Quebec, for many, where electricity isn't expensive enough, so there's no point thinking about storage. If there was a financial advantage for that, for creating those facilities and maybe being able to reimburse it quickly, well, then maybe we would increase energy efficiency and liberate megawatts for other projects.
Seconds.
Industrial technologies, well, yes, that is the case for storage, including for heat storage. On that point, Mr. Wilkinson mentioned it, but I think there's a good opportunity there to facilitate the introduction of different forms of storage, including heat storage, in the industry. If you have anything on that point to send to the committee by writing, please do so.
Thank you, Monsieur Simard. Yes, to our witnesses, welcome additional information, briefs. Thank you for tabling your document, Mr. Dunsky, and let me thank you on behalf of the committee for appearing before us today. Thanks for your patience because of the interruptions. Really appreciate you being with us today. And thank you,
Pleasure.
Colleagues.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Okay. And colleagues, we're going to suspend for 5 minutes while we bring the other witnesses aboard via Zoom. Suspend. again, and welcome back. And just let me start off with an apology to our witnesses. Thank you very much for your patience. We were interrupted by votes, and so we've lost a little time, but and we're going to be a little shorter in this round. Not much. You'll have an opportunity to respond to questions, but let me welcome from the First Nations Major Project Coalition, Dr. Suzanne Vonder Porton. I hope I pronounced that properly. Vice President of the Clean Energy Strategy for that organization. And from the Macdonald Laurier Institute, Heather Exner-Pirot, Director of Energy, Natural Resources and Environment. Both witnesses have done the mandatory witness onboarding test. And I'll just make a few comments to you both online for your benefit and for ours. Committee members may ask questions in either French or English. If you will need interpretation, please take a moment now to prepare your earpiece and select the listening channel you need in advance in order to take full advantage of the time allotted for questions and answers. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Each of you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open the floor for questions and comments. And Dr. Vonder Porton, we're going to start with you, and you have 5 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you. The First Nations Major Projects Coalition, or FNMPC, is a member-driven organization with more than 200 First Nation members. These remarks draw on FNMPC's research and experience in electrification, but they do not speak on behalf of our members or other rights holders. FNMPC's National Indigenous Electrification Strategy shows that Canada can only meet its electrification expansion goals with a major build-out of clean power and transmission. And that build-out must include clear opportunities for Indigenous nations to lead, partner in, and own that infrastructure with free, prior, and informed consent, and in alignment with Canada's United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. I will address each of the committee's core study areas briefly and in order. A, clean energy technologies. For First Nations, the full potential of new clean energy infrastructure includes leadership, partnership, and ownership in electricity generation, transmission, storage, and utility assets. These opportunities can create stable revenues, local employment, and greater control over development on Indigenous traditional territories. Canada's clean electricity build-out will require major expansion in hydro, wind, solar, geothermal, storage, transmission, and others. Indigenous-led and Indigenous-owned infrastructures in these areas will be critical to connecting new clean power to load centers while simultaneously advancing economic reconciliation and economic growth. B, peak power demand. Peak power demand is becoming a central challenge as electrification accelerates across housing, transportation, industry, and remote energy systems. For First Nations, this challenge is also an opportunity to lead and participate in solutions such as battery storage, demand-side management, distributed solar, and microgrids. FNMPC's paper entitled It's Our Time, Indigenous-Led Transmission Lines, available on our website, fnmpc.ca, reinforces that new transmission lines and interties, or interregional transmission, are part of the solution to peak demand because they improve grid capacity and connect regions. Our transmission paper also asserts that First Nations should have the lead role in identifying priority corridors where transmission will be built. C, diversification and industry development. Governments have an important role in market diversification by creating the policy certainty, procurement frameworks, and financing tools needed to scale clean electricity. For First Nations, this role should include measures that support Indigenous ownership rather than limiting participation to short-term or contracting or consultation. In the context of First Nations electricity infrastructure ownership, industry development should be understood as including First Nations-owned utilities, independent power production by First Nations, First Nations-led transmission projects, and First Nations equity positions in major electricity projects. D, importance of clean electricity sector. Electrification has become a core nation-building priority for Canada. That makes First Nations electricity infrastructure ownership strategically important, not only to reconciliation, but to whether Canada can build the scale of clean power required in time. For First Nations, the importance of the sector is twofold. One, it is essential for emissions reductions. Indigenous nations have for decades been sounding the alarm over changes to their lands and waters related to climatic changes. And two, it is also a major economic opportunity tied to the ownership of electricity infrastructure needed for the transition. Doubling Canada's electricity grid cannot be achieved at scale without new transmission corridors and interties. Indigenous transmission is essential to this. E, public policies supporting electrification. Public policies that support electrification are only effective if implementation is timely and coordinated. For First Nations, that means aligning infrastructure funding, regulatory approvals, timely procurement planning, utility planning, and opportunities for Indigenous leadership and ownership. Canada's policy implementation must address persistent barriers for First Nations, such as access to capital, limited early stage capacity funding, uneven utility relationships, and weak support for Indigenous-led utility development. Policies that ignore these realities risk repeating the exclusion of Indigenous nations seen in past industrial buildouts in Canada. F, energy self-sufficiency and energy security. For many First Nations, energy security means reducing reliance on imported fuels such as diesel, improving electricity reliability, and ensuring that infrastructure decisions reflect First Nations community priorities. Indigenous leadership and ownership are central to this work because they allow nations to shape development according to their own priorities for their nation members and on their lands and waters. FNNPC's Indigenous-led transmission paper demonstrates that domestic energy security is partly a transmission issue. Stronger interties and Indigenous-supported transmission lines in Canada can move clean power where it is needed, reduce regional vulnerability, and create a more flexible system response during shortages or rapid demand growth. And finally, G, respecting the jurisdictions of provinces and territories. For First Nations, respect for the jurisdictions of provinces and territories must be matched by respect for Indigenous lands, waters, rights, title, treaties, law, and decision-making authority. Electricity infrastructure often crosses traditional territories, which means project development depends on consent-based approaches that recognize First Nations as rights holders of their lands and waters and leaders and owners of electricity projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Von der Porten. Now we're on to Ms. Exner-Pirot for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to appear today to discuss Canada's electrification, energy self-sufficiency, and domestic energy security. And before I start, can I commend the committee on an excellent report on the development of critical minerals? I thought that was very good. I cannot overemphasize the extent to which I think abundant and affordable electricity generation will be a strategic advantage in the coming decade, and how important it is that Canada builds all types of electricity generation to meet this moment. Electricity was once one of Canada's greatest competitive advantages. For decades, our provinces built generation capacity ahead of demand. Reliable and affordable power, bolstered by our immense hydroelectric capacity and nuclear expertise, supported industrial development, resource extraction, manufacturing, and economic growth. We enjoyed a surplus of electricity and the economic gains that came with it. But over time, we shifted from building for abundance to planning for scarcity. Investments slowed, regulatory timelines lengthened, major projects became harder to approve, and governments increasingly focused on managing demand rather than expanding supply. The result is that Canada entered the 2020s with far less surplus capacity than we once had, and with an electricity system that is less resilient than many Canadians assume. In fact, our electricity generation peaked in 2017. Our per capita usage is in a steep decline, And we have months recently where we've been a net importer rather than exporter to the United States. This would be concerning under any circumstances, but in 2026, it is close to catastrophic. AI and data center growth, natural gas liquefaction, critical mineral processing, electrification of heating and transportation, reshoring of defense industrial supply chains, all of this is at risk due to a lack of adequate electricity supply. For much of the early 21st century, electricity demand in Canada and across much of the Western world was flat. Efficiency improvements reduced demand. Industrial consumption stagnated as manufacturing capacity moved to China, and utilities planned for very modest growth. But the long plateau is now over. Canada should be entering this era from a position of strength, but despite our advantages, we have spent much of the last 2 decades squandering them. Electricity policy has been viewed in Canada for the past decade mainly through a lens of decarbonization. It must now turn to growth. This is fundamentally a security issue as much as an environmental or economic one. Energy security means having enough reliable energy available when citizens and industries need it. But today it also means being able to host energy-intensive industries such as aluminum smelters, mines, LNG facilities, and data centers. In an increasingly uncertain world, countries that can generate abundant and affordable energy will enjoy a significant strategic advantage. Those that cannot will face higher costs, slower growth, and greater vulnerability to supply chain disruptions. That brings me to the role of natural gas. The conversation around Canada's electricity future is often framed as a choice between natural gas and other forms of generation. That is the wrong framework. The real choice is between abundance and scarcity. Natural gas is uniquely positioned to help Canada meet rapidly growing electricity demand. It is dispatchable, scalable, affordable, and can be deployed relatively quickly compared to many alternatives. It complements intermittent generation and provides reliability during periods of peak demand. Importantly, even the federal government's emerging electricity strategy under Prime Minister Carney recognizes an ongoing role for natural gas in maintaining reliability and supporting economic growth. No province is more important to this discussion than Alberta. We possess some of the least expensive natural gas in the world, well over a century's supply, and a competitive or deregulated electricity market that can accommodate rapid private sector growth. If Canada is serious about rapidly expanding electricity supply, Alberta and natural gas generation will be indispensable. More broadly, Canada should adopt a strategy based on abundance rather than constraint, accelerating generation, transmission, interconnections, and permitting. We should be encouraging investment rather than creating uncertainty around it. Canada can once again become a country known for energy abundance. We can attract investment, strengthen our energy security, support our allies, and improve living standards at home, but doing so will require a change in mindset. The question is not whether we need more electricity, but whether we are prepared to build it. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to questions.
Thank you. We will move on to questions and comments by members of Parliament, starting with Mrs. Stubbs for 6 minutes. Mrs. Stubbs.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, both witnesses, for attending here today. You did both mention the importance of intertie construction, and I must confess to you, as a member of Parliament who has been on this committee for the majority of the last 11 years, I certainly was here in 2017 when Dr. Exner-Perot, you mentioned a very important thing that happened, and it was that very year that this committee made all-party recommendations to advance the construction of interties, and what a different world we might be in today if that had actually unfolded. Dr. Exner-Perot, in your report, Blackout, you highlighted, as you had mentioned, that Canada became a net importer of electricity for the first time in modern history in spring 2024. And you pointed out that both BC and Quebec imported electricity, which was characterized as a previously unthinkable outcome. You also identified liberal policies that significantly increase regulatory burden and block the kind of construction that is necessary to meet all the various industrial, national security and affordability and self-reliance goals that the government professes to want to support. Do you want to expand on some of those policies that are blocking building and the fixes that could be made urgently?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And the electricity strategy does address some. So the one that was the most painful was the clean electricity strategy, because it did block essentially all new natural gas generation beginning this year at at pain of criminal offense if you did so and fired it up later on. And so certainly from a Alberta Saskatchewan perspective, that was very devastating. And certainly from an Alberta perspective, where you have this incredible data center opportunity, tens of billions of dollars being spent, hundreds of billions in the United States on data centers. And because we could not build new natural gas generation, much of that opportunity started to bypass us. Now it's coming back, of course, because the CR was including in the MOU, and there was the commitment to the carve out, and it is now in abeyance. So that's positive. But as soon as that can be settled, obviously, the uncertainty still creates some risk, but things are much better than they were 6 months ago. That is for sure. As similar with the Impact Assessment Act. Again, it included, many types of projects that, maybe could have been excluded from the Impact Assessment Act, different sizes, and obviously nuclear being wrapped up in that. With the proposed reforms, that would be fantastic if they were passed. We're all hoping those reforms eventually do come to pass, and that should take some of the burden certainly off the nuclear industry.
And Dr. Exner-Perot, to your point about the clean electricity regulations, I too followed and participated in many of those discussions. It is quite an ambitious goal, of course, with a grid nationally. It's already considered 87% clean, and now to double and triple that in the timeline that this government has set out. I recognize too and also value the fact that this agreement, after the efforts of the government of Alberta, was made to suspend the clean electricity regulations in that province. Do you think that it makes sense then, as Conservatives have called for, to ensure that those clean electricity regulations don't apply to all of the provinces if one agreement has been made with one province, recognizing that it is unflexible and would ultimately potentially result in a lack of electricity, power, and affordable rates?
That would absolutely be my preference, and I expect it's the preference of many utilities. We heard just last week that BC Hydro is going to continue with some natural gas, bring some generation back on, and just today that NB Power has asked again for that emergency application to have new natural gas generation online by 2028, lest it face blackouts, which was what inspired the title of my report, actually. This is extremely serious. The idea of there was that big winter storm. It did tax electricity systems. Our utilities behave very admirably, but it's a matter of time unless we build some more firm power that there is a crisis. And so obviously there are many provinces, Manitoba is another one, that would need some natural gas generation.
Thank you. And, the importance of ensuring that there's abundant, available, affordable power and fuel for all Canadians is so important, especially for Indigenous communities, as Dr. Van de Porten has pointed out. My question for you, Dr. Van de Porten, is back in the debates on C-69, Conservatives, of course, supported increased capacity funding for First Nations participation in regulatory processes. Conservatives also support more equity ownership and all kinds of energy development production. And what I've found from First Nations and Métis settlements that I've followed up with since those debates is that almost none of them, all of them say that no funding ever did flow from capacity funding at a C-69 to assist in the regulatory process for First Nations and now Métis people to participate. I wonder if you have any comments on that. And you yourself also commented on the importance and potential of more Indigenous transmission, generation, and ownership. Is there anything that you'd like to expand in that regard?
No, I have nothing to expand on there or to your question.
So I guess my question for you is, has the government then followed up with you or any of your members about electricity interties and about exactly the kinds of issues that you have said today are important to your coalition?
Just for some clarity on our organization, we are a member-driven organization and we support our members who ask us for support on project development. So we don't track whether our members have been approached by government.
Okay. Yes, thank you. And I recognize your important distinction between advocacy organizations and those communities that actually have rights and title. And so that's an important distinction. Thank you for that.
And that, unfortunately, is time. Thank you. Thank you both. On to Mr. Saini. 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to both the witnesses. Madam Van Porten, one thing that I am very glad that you're representing 200 First Nations community, which is made up of chiefs, hereditary chief. You know, this is a very great thing to see that there's a collaboration and everybody is working together. My question to you is, can you explain to the committee the importance of Indigenous partnership and leadership to promote energy security in Canada?
Thank you for your question. I should clarify, we do not represent our 200 plus members, but we support them on projects of their choosing. To your question, the importance of Indigenous leadership and Indigenous ownership on these electricity projects is primarily because it's Indigenous lands and waters that all or most of these projects will run on or run through. For example, transmission lines. Nations need to be the leaders of that for siting, routing, priorities, which type of projects go there. And part of that, as I mentioned, is economic reconciliation. And part of that also is economic growth. We don't want to fall behind the rest of the world, which is moving faster than Canada on clean energy. And we also want to have that competitive advantage to make sure we don't fall behind in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. My next question is to Ms. Pirate. Can you explain the importance of one project, one review agreement to streamlining project permitting?
Yeah, great question. Of course, pretty much every private proponent wants a simplified regulatory process. I did, for my report, interview several power producers to talk about how easy it was for them to attract investment. And the general sense was that it was much easier in the United States. And obviously, when we're all competing for the same components, the same supply chain, the same labor force, it's very important that we're competitive in Canada. Because we know that they will snake up as much as they can in the South to take advantage of the data center boom. And so having at least a coherent and simple regulatory process helps make us less uncompetitive. And so, again, ensuring that what is provincial stays provincial. In general, electricity tends to be under provincial jurisdiction. There are, of course, some elements like nuclear, interprovincial transmission, some things to do with fisheries, that the federal government has to get involved in. But working collaboratively with the provinces to ensure that they're coordinated and that from the private proponent's perspective, it's fairly seamless is important. There has been very good progress in that regard with the cooperation agreements. And hopefully with the proposed reforms that they go through, that will further streamline the processes you discussed.
The next question is for Dr. Van Poten. Do you support the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program? Is it a helpful tool to promote Indigenous equity in major projects?
Thank you for your question. Yes, the National Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program was the major effort of the FNMPC in terms of our work over the last 10 years. Originally, when we first started the organization, now something like 12 years ago, Indigenous nations, First Nations wanted to buy into major projects, and the interest rates they were being given by lenders made it so that it wouldn't be profitable to buy in. And so the importance of the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program at the federal level and at subnational levels is that there is now Indigenous access to competitively priced capital so that nations can buy into these projects if they want to, in particular the ones that are running on their lands or they see as a priority. And just to, this is the report here that I was talking about, Indigenous-led transmission lines, but we also have a national Indigenous electrification strategy, and I'm happy to submit that to the committee. And that describes exactly the questions that you're asking. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have?
You've got a minute.
Indigenous-led. Dr. Van Poten, how can LNG development strengthen Canada's energy security and global energy security?
The FNMPC is an industry agnostic organization. So we don't advise our First Nations on what types of energy or what types of projects to invest in. What they do is come to us and say, hey, there's a project we're thinking of leading, or hey, we've been approached by a proponent that would like to work on this project with us. Could you help us with negotiations, or could you help us with access to capital? Could you help us with thinking about commercial structuring? So comments on LNG one way or the other isn't the purview of our organization. Thank you.
Thank you both. Monsieur Simard, 6 minutes.
Merci, Terry.
Thank you, Terry. Madam Exner-Pirot, it's lovely to see you here with us. You were so helpful during our study on critical minerals. In your opening remarks, you talked about net imports that Quebec does in hydro. Perhaps there's some nuance there. There are two different things that explain that. In the last 3 years, unprecedentedly, there are very low reserves in hydro dams. In the next few years with climate change, there will be so much rain that we should have the opposite issue. That's part of the explanation. The other part is this. Hydro-Quebec has a dynamic strategy. They buy they buy electricity from our American partners during low periods when it's much cheaper, 5 cents per kilowatt hour, to up their reservoirs. And in more intensive periods, they sell it back at 15 cents per kilowatt hour. That's their strategy. And that also explains that they're consumers. Their reservoirs can be used as a battery, which the Americans can't do. And they use that to balance their import-export. So we're selling electricity to Americans. That's $1.5 billion that Hydro-Quebec is making for Quebecers. That was brought up earlier this week. And I'm the first person to criticize the government, but this has nothing to do with the federal government because that is the exclusive decision of Hydro-Quebec. So the way that they decide, or the time that they decide to buy electricity from the Americans, well, that is exclusively their purview, their commercial strategy. I think it's important to highlight that. Here's another thing. In the beginning of the study, witnesses said, what you told us, we are going to need to increase our production. But when we increase our production, if I remember correctly, that was the case for Mr. Mousseau and Mr. Pinault, both of them did not view favorably the idea of providing more energy to data centers. Please speak to that. That was something you mentioned in your opening remarks. Wouldn't it be better to prioritize industrial sectors before giving energy to data centers?
Canada had become a net importer, not Hydro-Quebec. Although Hydro-Quebec had become an importer in the last year, you will note also BC Hydro for the last 3 years was a net importer. And it's not so much that Quebec shouldn't trade electricity and make profits. It's very good at that. It is that Canada used to export over 5 terawatt hours annually to the United States. And now basically we have a relatively equal trading relationship. It was a tremendous abundance of electricity that Canada used to have. We could get more value by selling it to the United States, and that has evaporated. Which goes to your next question about abundance in data centers. This is where we're at in Canada because we have run through our electricity abundance that now we are picking and choosing winners and losers of who in this country should get electricity. We don't have enough for everyone that wants electricity. And so we have to prioritize, and that violates some principles of the right to service that had traditionally for decades underpinned Canadian electricity generation. But we have all seen in the United States, we saw it here with Wab Kinew this week, this sense of making data centers into a villain, and it's creating electricity price increases, and it's bad for the environment, and it's taking away from more positive industries that would create more jobs. And from a strategic perspective, to not want to develop AI data centers in your own country and have that sovereign capability and have your data stored here, to only allow China and the United States to gain competitive advantage in AI. To me, AI is not just manufacturing or industry. It's also going to be a weapon. It will absolutely be used in a strategic way as a weapon. And so we have to have capacity in Canada. And so when I see that BC Hydro has, a strategy of prioritizing sectors like LNG and mining over data centers, when Quebec has different rates for data centers, when Wab Kinew in Manitoba is saying to some data centers that they don't want them there, they're not good for humanity, that does concern me as a political scientist thinking about Canada's data sovereignty, as we've been calling it. And so, yeah.
I understand. Yes, I understand. But you can take the reverse logic. Americans don't produce aluminum. Aluminum is energy. It takes a lot of energy to produce aluminum. So American aluminum factories, because they're really dependent on us, they slap the tariffs on us. Aluminum factories in America, in the United States, they developed a program. They had to depend on energy that was given to data centers. So they did not get data centers. So in the United States, because they give a lot of energy to data centers, their industrial sector is on the losing end. So if we only have a strategy based on data centers, our industrial sector, our economy will suffer. And I understand your argument that strategically we do need to develop AI. I'll be really, really fast. I know that you're really good at data. So if you have anything to send us, we would be interested in reading it.
Thank you both. Good exchange there. Monsieur Millette, I understand you'll be splitting your time.
Yes, Mr. Chair, and I will start. So the question to Dr. Van der Poorten. You're Vice President of Clean Energy Strategy, but what interests me here is First Nations Major Project Coalition, and you did talk of your document, if you could show it again, Indigenous-led power line transmission. Yes. Are you aware of, or is the Five Nations Energy Company from Northern Ontario part of your group, or do you know of them?
I know of them very well. They are not one of our members. There's 5 nations within that, and to be honest, I would have to check because we have 200 members whether one of them in there. But I am very aware of that project. Yeah, you'll see it when you read this paper. They're highlighted in there.
Okay, and so my question here is. I think they're an example, and if they're in your paper, you've probably looked at them. So do you see transmission lines, well, of course, in Northern Ontario or across Canada, as a potential of long-term Indigenous-owned economic assets? And what can the federal government do? Because the Five Nations energy is a great example of a great success.
Five Nations Energy is a great example, and for those unfamiliar with it, it serves 3 First Nations in Ontario, and there's 5 nations total bought into it. That's why it's called Five Nations, and it's Indigenous owned, Indigenous initiated. The nations decided where the transmission line were going to go, and it's steady revenues over many, many decades. And it also opens up opportunities. So it allowed them to bring electricity to otherwise unserved nations, to create distribution lines to their domestic but as well as to start bringing other opportunities, economic as well as new power generation. Wataynikaneyap Power also in Ontario is another example of an Indigenous-owned power line, and recently in British Columbia, the North Coast Transmission Line. All of these have in common Indigenous leadership or ownership or partnership. And all in every case, having nations on board at the earliest possible stage, or in some cases, as you'll be seeing, Indigenous initiated lines are incredibly important to having them move and having the delays problem. As in the previous witnesses, I heard Philippe Dunsky saying that if he were to pick one thing, it would be interties and transmission. And given that, it's very clear if we want to move that forward, Indigenous ownership is a great start.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Exner-Pro, good to talk to you again, and I appreciate the work that you did on Defence Committee a few weeks back. I also appreciate your accurate analysis of AI with regard to a security nexus and your comments about putting aside decarbonization to focus on progress and production of electricity. You spoke about energy as a pillar of national security, and I certainly agree with that. And the Defence Industrial Strategy considers critical minerals as a strategic asset. And my question is, do you think that, say, an energy grid is also a strategic national defence or a security asset? And is it just electricity, or would you consider, as you talked about, liquid natural gas and also oil as critical to the national security and sovereignty of Canada?
Well, it's all wildly critical, sovereignty and national security. And I'll point out, as we've witnessed in the Strait of Hormuz and as we've witnessed in Ukraine and Russia, after military targets, the top target for these conflicts is energy infrastructure. Pipelines, power generation, transmission lines. Why is that? Because it's very painful for civilians to run out of energy, because it's very damaging to defense industrial supply chains to not have that energy. And so obviously these are important things. I also chair the Energy Security Summit with a group of private proponents, and they are facing cyber attacks on our electricity, on our pipeline systems, pretty much on a daily basis. Some of it is criminal in the sense that it's for ransomware, but some of it is state
So if I could jump in, and I have a few seconds left, and I appreciate your perfect segue, and I just wanted to talk, and maybe you could continue a little bit more about steps that we should be taking, that we haven't taken, to protect these assets from cyber attack, sabotage, so pre-kinetic threats, and then also, as we've seen in other parts of the world, post-kinetic threats. Has Canada taken any steps to protect these critical assets national security assets, and if not, what steps should we be taking?
So I think they are starting.
Answer, please. Yep.
Yeah, they are starting to take it, but obviously there's much more to be done, and the private sector and government has to work. Utilities work in very close coordination to achieve this.
Perhaps you could just submit both your report, blackout, and anything else you'd like to add on that subject, because we've run out of time. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your patience.
And thank you, Mr. Kibble. That was a great suggestion. So, Ms. McKelvey, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are for Dr. Von Deporten. You spoke about leadership, partnership, ownership, and that is the most effective model to move forward with clean energy and electrification. I'm just wondering, there are programs like the Indigenous Loan Guarantees Program, but what other things do you think are needed to be put in place so that we can really support these endeavors and really help our First Nations be a part of this transition?
Yeah, it's an important question. The biggest thing is capacity supports for First Nations. First Nations are not on a level playing field with the utilities that are approaching them to work on projects in terms of resourcing people, money experts, geoengineers, routing experts. They're also not on the same playing field as governments, provincial or otherwise, and as well as industry. In all those cases, First Nations are being approached they're really outcompeted in terms of resources. So resourcing nations in terms of experts and capacity supports, lawyers, consultants, all the things you need to really think about it, and resourcing for First Nations to do comprehensive community planning so they know what their members want and aren't surprised by projects. And finally, thinking about setting nations up so they can take advantage of procurement. For example, a transmission line going in requires very specialized electricians. If nations are to tool up their members to take part in those types of industries, they need lead time to certify and to create that kind of job opportunities and to create Indigenous-owned businesses to meet the moment with the correct industry.
Thank you. And so I come from a Western science worldview. That's my background. But there's incredible Indigenous knowledge that comes from millennia living on the land. And as site assessment, site identification takes place, it's really important to engage in partnership and to have those discussions on how we can best interweave Indigenous knowledge into the decision-making processes. So I'm just wondering, do you have examples of best practice around this, suggestions of, where this is being done really well that we can, learn together and go forward in a good way?
Those are good questions. To the first part of the best practices is always what that First Nation is looking for. So you will have even two neighboring nations that have completely different priorities, protocols, approaches to applying their Indigenous knowledge and understanding of the land and waters around them, of how they want to site, route electricity projects. So this report that I spoke of, we give examples of all of the known Indigenous-owned transmission lines that we identified in Canada that are either in the works or are done, like the ones we spoke about, Five Nations Energy, Watchkinia Power, and North Coast Transmission Line. And those are all excellent examples to learn from of how we have done things. And we outline each one of those in this report. It's public facing, and it also is digestible. It's not going to be one of your denser reads. It's meant for anyone in the lay public to understand. And with electricity lines, we have a little bit of a benefit where we can decide on the siting and decide on the routes. With natural resource-based projects, you're more limited because it's where the deposit is. So in terms of capacity building, and coming back to that question, just recognizing that you work with all major projects, do you have suggestions around that industry as well as around mining and more natural resource based on how we can also work better together on leadership, partnership, and ownership on those projects? I will point you to our recent, we have two total, but we also have a recent critical minerals report that I would like to submit as well, if that's interest. My understanding was that this committee is focused on electricity, but there are really similar suggestions in terms of prioritizing prioritizing First Nations from the earliest possible stages, letting the nation outline the risk, letting the nation outline their amount of equity. Those are very, like you said, those are very different industries. The risk level to owning a long-term electricity asset and potentially getting into mining can be quite different, and the nation needs to be tooled up so they can make decisions accordingly.
Thank you both. Finalement, Monsieur Simard.
And lastly, Mr. Simard, 2.5 minutes. Pronounce it right, Terry. I heard femalely. That's not finally. That's just a little joke for the francophones among us. Now, I'll go quickly. Madame Exner-Perrot, there's a Canadian strategy that was tabled earlier in your opening remarks. You said going in growth mode. Yes, we need to go in growth mode. But the Canadian energy landscape is diverse. Take Quebec. 40% is hydro, and the rest of Canada, it's 17%. So there are many different situations. So I have a hard time understanding that there can be a pan-Canadian strategy because there are such different situations. And when you produce this kind of report, for you, would it be possible to break it down by region? to give us an overview of how the electric system works in each province. In Quebec, more hydro; in Ontario, more nuclear energy, for instance. And strategically, I think that would be really key. Quebec already has a strategy that was announced that's slated for 2035, and Quebec still needs to work on energy efficiency. There are people in Quebec that don't know the value of electricity, households that don't know the value of electricity because of our heritage. We see it as an abundant resource and an acceptable price. In my opinion, we need to take all of that into account, but that's different from a pan-Canadian strategy. Please speak to that.
Yeah, great question. We'll probably be similar in agreeing that, electricity is provincial jurisdiction and the provinces should lead. The obvious areas for me where this committee and where the government should lead is on nuclear, on financing. What are the financing tools that all the utilities will be able to access? I think hydro and nuclear could benefit from the government's credit rating. And then obviously, finalizing what that clean electricity regulations parameter is going to look like in the future. It has absolutely detracted investment in Saskatchewan and Alberta and elsewhere. And so just making sure that there are no federal regulations that are impeding the individual provinces from doing what they think is best in their jurisdiction.
Okay, that is our time. Colleagues, let me thank on your behalf once again our witnesses. Great exchanges around the table today. A number of reports were mentioned by our witnesses. We welcome those or any other information you'd like to send along to us. And finalement.
And femalely.
Bureau for that compliment on our report. There was considerable alignment between committee members, no matter what their political stripe. And I would argue that there's a fair bit of alignment when it comes to this study as well. But we will see in the final product, and maybe you'll have another compliment for us. So with that, colleagues, we are adjourned.